everybody. Hi, I'm Rachel. I just wanted to say thank you to Ruth for such a powerful presentation that she did there. And I'll just switch over to my slides now so that you can all see my presentation. But hello, and thank you to the team for inviting me to present at this fantastic event. My name is Rachel Dickens, and I am the UK Programmes Manager at an organisation called Stronger Together. And for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about how Stronger Together works with businesses specifically to address the risk of forced labour, one of those many modern slavery offences and practices. Now, we've heard from earlier speakers today about the prevalence of victims of modern slavery who have arrived in Wisbech searching for honest, good work. And all over the UK, exploiters are targeting individuals looking to set themselves up, looking for work and placing them in forced labour conditions. Before I actually joined Stronger Together, I worked for one of the UK's largest supermarkets in their corporate social responsibility department, focusing specifically on addressing human rights risks like modern slavery within the business itself, as well as the full supply chain. And I was responsible for implementation of that business's modern slavery strategy. Human trafficking, forced labour, labour exploitation is a significant problem here in the UK. It exists in every sector, every industry, every supply chain. And in my role at that supermarket, I supported the investigation of over 20 suspected modern slavery cases within that company's own operations. And a number of them did result in the positive identification of victims. And it was ultimately those experiences that led me to where I am now, working for Stronger Together, a multi-stakeholder initiative that was set up to support the business community to address these very, very real risks of forced labour and human trafficking. So a little bit about Stronger Together then. So we are a not-for-profit organisation. We're funded by business sponsors, by the Home Office, by grants, by our consultancy and training services. And our vision is for supply chains free from modern slavery. Our mission is to reduce forced labour, human trafficking and other hidden third-party labour exploitation. And Stronger Together was actually established back, like we say, in 2013, when a number of UK supermarkets actually approached our founder, David Camp, and asked for some support to address the forced labour, the modern slavery that they were finding in their supply chain. But at the time, this was referred to as exploitation or, forged passports, right to work documentation. And the terminology and understanding of modern slavery didn't really take off in the private sector until that legislation was introduced here in the UK in 2015 with the Modern Slavery Act. And with that legislation brought additional challenges for the private sector. It brought new requirements to increase transparency of how they were addressing these human rights abuses in their own operations and supply chains through that modern slavery statement reporting. Now, before I move on to the next slide, just want to make the audience aware that I will be referring to details of a real modern slavery case that was identified here in the UK. And it will include a little bit of information about the ways in which impacted individuals were treated. So I mentioned before, Stronger Together focuses specifically on forced labour, just one of the multiple offences that come under this term modern slavery and that we've heard about today. And it can be really difficult to understand, how does an individual end up in a situation where they can't leave their job, where they're being forced to work for somebody else's personal gain. But unfortunately, this is in fact happening all over the UK. In 2019, the majority of people that were referred to the National Referral Mechanism and that we heard about earlier as potential victims of modern slavery, they were victims of labour exploitation offences. And it's cases like this one, Operation 4, that businesses across the UK, across multiple industry sectors, are being impacted by. Be that through infiltration by rogue staff, be that through infiltration by organised criminal gangs, or actually the business itself, in fact, being complicit in that exploitation. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with this case study, Operation Fort was the largest criminal modern slavery network identified to date in the UK, and for 5 years, 8 offenders from 2 Polish organised crime gangs were trafficking individuals over to the UK and holding them in conditions of forced labour. And these victims were forced to live in appalling conditions, and they were forced to work in farms, in factories, in waste processing plants, in parcel sorting warehouses, all over the UK. And a number of the businesses that were unknowingly using these victims through their temporary recruitment agencies are very well-known organisations. The gang infiltrated their business, allowing them to manipulate worker personnel records, for example, their bank details. They implanted members of the gang into businesses so that they could observe their victims all of the time and check that they weren't asking for help. And ultimately, the gang made £2 million from the exploitation of those victims. Now, 92 were formally identified during the investigation, but it is actually thought that the true number was closer to 400 victims in total. Stronger Together is at its core a collaborative programme, a bit like we saw earlier. You know, the only viable way to effectively address such a serious criminal offence is to work in collaboration. And that is a sentiment that has been echoed regularly throughout this conference so far. We are very grateful to our development partners and their sponsors for their support. We work with loads of different organisations with specialist expertise or key roles within their industry sectors. And these specialists have contributed to the development of all our tools, our training and our resources, and the business representatives have allowed us to share these at scale and raise awareness throughout their supply chains. In terms of scope, we currently operate programmes for the UK consumer goods and construction sectors. So consumer goods covers food processing, general merchandise, agriculture, as well as those additional services such as warehousing and logistics that actually enable that supply chain to operate. We also focus on the temporary recruitment sector, so labour providers and recruitment agencies, because we know that they are high risk to infiltration, and it tends to be workers that are in precarious roles and contracts that are targeted for forced labour. But we know that the problem is not isolated to the UK. We know that millions of people are in forced labour all over the world. So we do have additional programmes in South Africa, Spain and the US, all predominantly focusing on fresh produce out there internationally. And we also look at wine in South Africa. The reason being that it is migrant and seasonal workers that tend to be targeted for exploitation, and these tend to make up the majority of the work profile in those sectors. But we're always on the lookout for additional opportunities to expand our reach in order to for us to fulfill, you know, that vision of supply chains free of modern slavery. But what do we actually do? Well, ultimately, we are here to support the business community to deter, detect, and deal with forced labour and hidden labour exploitation. We develop toolkits that capture pragmatic guidance and good practice examples to support businesses to implement risk management processes and operational controls. And this includes things like how to conduct proactive checks on personnel records, how to apply responsible recruitment practices, particularly in light of changes to processes as a result of COVID-19, how to perform a risk assessment on your business and supply chain. How do you establish minimum labour standards for your recruiters and your suppliers? How to conduct an effective welfare conversation with workers? And crucially, how to develop a response plan in the event that you do, in fact, identify a potential case. We've developed template policies and procedural documents for businesses to adapt to suit their own needs and support implementation. We've got free monitoring and progress reporting tools that enable businesses to track what they're doing and share the progress that they're making with clients, with customers, with investors, with the consumer. Raising awareness of forced labour is essential, again, something that's been echoed regularly today. A lot of victims of modern slavery just don't realise that the way they were being treated, is not acceptable in the UK, or that this is actually considered a crime, and that there are people out there, support services out there to help them. So created a suite of resources. We've got posters, leaflets, awareness raising videos, an app to kind of inform workers about their basic rights, their labour rights in the UK, to empower them to be able to identify where something may not be right. Most of those resources are available in multiple languages, and we provide a lot of training solutions as well. Now, what's key for us is that our resources are open source. They are completely free to download from our website. So businesses who are in the supply chain of those program sponsors we saw on the earlier slide, they can actually access free training places as well. We want to open it up and get that message out as much as possible. But ultimately, what we really strive to do is to bring that business community together to talk about their shared challenges and share good practice. Be that through open webinars, through dedicated events or our training workshops. We want to keep people talking, raising awareness and sharing best practice to address these issues. And one of the businesses that we have worked with that, is in fact in the local area is Prince's Group. Very well known, and Prince's have been very, very kind to provide some insights for us today on the work that we've done with them over the last few years. Now, we actually started working with Prince's back in 2016 and have continued to engage with them since then. Prince's is recognised as one of our business partners, so an organisation that has publicly uploaded evidence to our website to say, this is what we're doing, this is the action we're taking to address these issues. And at the Wisbech site and all other Prince's locations, they are raising awareness of modern slavery directly with the workers who may be affected or know someone in that local community through using our free videos, our presentation templates and posters. So they've incorporated these tools into the inductions that all new workers attend when joining the site. The leaflets, the posters are circulated, they're displayed in strategic areas within the Wisbech site. So for example, our key recommendation is in fact using posters on the back of toilet doors as an example. And actually the first case I identified in my previous role was because someone saw a Stronger Together poster on the back of the toilet door that said, please contact this manager, and they came forward and reported what was happening to them. So being a bit strategic about placement of certain communication materials. I've developed, we delivered multiple training workshops to staff within Prince's Group so that they understand what the indicators of hidden labour exploitation are, and they know how to respond where they think they may have a concern about an individual or a group of individuals. And that includes signposting to organisations like Stop the Traffic, like the Salvation Army, like the GLAA, and their local police forces. We've also supported them in implementing due diligence checks on their worker records so that they can identify where large groups of people might be living in the same accommodation, or where they may be sharing the same bank account, they have the same emergency contact number, contact name, because these are all potential indicators of modern slavery, of forced labour. Prince's acknowledged the complexity of modern slavery, the scale of prevalence, but is committed to addressing human rights issues that impact their business and the supply chain. And they are a fantastic example of some of the great work some of the businesses in your local area are doing to try address these issues. I've actually taken the final slide that I want to show you from our training workshops. Whilst we focus on building capacity and resilience with the businesses that we work with, Ultimately, it's about winning hearts and minds. It's doing what we can to make more and more people aware of the reality of the issue and the scale of slavery that is still present here today. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for inviting me to speak. And please feel free to get in touch with us if you want to via the email address you can see there. But that is it from me. And I believe we are now opening up to a Q&A panel that is being led by Carl. So over to you and thank you.